Well, hi everybody, I'm Lee Foster. I run the cybersecurity practice here at Insentra. I'm lucky enough to be joined today by Singh from Microsoft and Ludbrook also from Insentra. So Kenny, first, would you mind giving us a bit of background on yourself?
Absolutely, Lee. Thank you. So I'm the security lead for the One Channel Partner Organisation, Microsoft Australia.
Thanks, Kenny.
Okay.
And Thomas?
Yep, I'm the practice manager for cloud and collaboration, or the Microsoft business within Insentra.
Thanks, guys. So what we want to talk about today is ostensibly the Microsoft Office 365 E3 platform and the E5 platform, and the values that exist within both of those. Certainly from where I see it, and Kenny, this is more towards you, right, is that often I'll talk to executives and talk to the partners, and they have a customer base that has some entitlement, that they've got some consumption of E3, they have some understanding of what's going on but not real visibility. So maybe talk to us a little bit about what benefits they get from moving from an E3 to an E5 to provide that broader visibility and broader spectrum of coverage.
So absolutely. I'd love to have a conversation about that. Before we do that, can I actually just provide a little overview of how Microsoft is actually thinking about securing these new themes that have actually emerged in the workplaces of today's?
Sure.
Okay, great, fantastic. All right, so we touched on a few challenges, right? So there was the challenge of the fact that you actually have people in organizations who might potentially work from home or might work from different locations on a device that's not directly controlled by the organization. It might actually be a situation where information is actually stored on premises, or it might actually be stored in a SaaS application in the cloud. So what we've actually done at Microsoft is we basically thought through how we take each of these individual challenges and create a very orchestrated story on how these challenges can actually be best addressed in the most, let's say, unified and integrated manner. Right? So what I'll actually do is I'll just quickly walk you through just a few tenets of this story. Right? So, excuse me. The first tenet of the story is identity-driven security. So what that basically means is that no longer do we actually have the luxury in organizations to treat a corporate network as a security boundary, because people might actually be working from home, or they might actually be working from different partner locations and so on and so forth. So if the boundary is not network at that network security level, then what really is the boundary? Right, so then the industry sort of mobilized their resources, and then the next boundary basically became the boundary of the device, right? So with mobile device management, you could actually control the device. May that actually be a Windows device or an iOS device or an Android device, right? At Microsoft, we're actually thinking about it in terms of, or we're thinking about the perimeter as the identity. So irrespective of whether that identity is actually used on a device that is directly controlled by the organization, or it's actually used inside the boundary of the organization's corporate network, or it's actually used from outside the corporate network, anywhere in the world, we actually protect the identity first and foremost. So we actually like to think about the identity as the front door to all the information that actually resides within an organization. Right? So that's the identity-driven security model. So we have extensive investments in making sure that using machine learning, using artificial intelligence, we actually secure the identities as much as possible. And obviously we actually have a very rich framework of policies that can be applied at an administrative level as well. So the whole conditional access capability that we actually have available. So that's identity-driven security. Now, we do offer very comprehensive device level protection as well. So we have mobile device management for iOS and Android, and for Windows 10 devices as well. So that's first class, A-class, and enterprise ready mobile device management. For those situations where organizations don't have direct control on devices, so more the bring your own device scenarios, we actually have mobile application management. So you can actually just control data at an application level. So you can ensure that corporate data actually does not go out of the sanctioned applications on these mobile devices. So that's mobile device management, mobile application management. We also have deep security built into Windows 10 in features like BitLocker and Credential Guard and Device Guard, and baked in antivirus solutions and Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, right? So this comprehensive endpoint level protection, device level protection that we actually provide. What we've then done is we've thought about how we basically embed security in the content itself. right? So yes, we can actually protect at that identity level, and yes, we can actually protect at the device level through a plethora of features. But how do we actually ensure that information itself is self-protecting, and irrespective of whether information actually ends up, it's protected at all times, and it's totally controllable from a life cycle management perspective. So for that, we actually have a very rich set of capabilities in our information protection story around the identification of sensitive information, the classification of sensitive information, the protection of sensitive information, and then the monitoring of sensitive information. So that's the whole information protection side of things. So the paradigm there is that wherever the information lives, it actually carries security with it. So you have identity-driven security, you have all the protection that we actually have at a device level, at an endpoint level, so the intelligent edge, as you'll sometimes hear it referred to, and then the security built into information. And that's all complemented by what we actually call intelligent security management, which basically means that all these different components actually talk to each other. So what you can basically do is you can control the security across all these different nodes, so across your endpoints and across your cloud investments and across your on-premises investments, will actually give you proactive guidance on further security hardening your devices and endpoints and cloud investments and on-premises investments. So it's a very integrated story around identity-driven security, device-level protection, information protection, and intelligent security management. So I hope that actually gives a good overview of what the overall value proposition is.
Absolutely,
Cool.
absolutely, Ken.
Fantastic.
Clearly, from a Microsoft standpoint, as a comprehensive line of coverage, what's critical for us to sort of portray here is how does a partner who's working with a customer that has identified some of the risks that we've discussed take that customer from, let's say, an E3 subscription to an E5? What are in Microsoft's terms, what are the key differentiators between what they get from an E3 subscription and what they would obtain by moving to an E5?
Absolutely. So what I'll actually do is I'll describe the significant value proposition that we actually have in E5 pivoted around security. Right, because then the other component of it is the PSTN calling with Skype for Business. So for the purpose of this conversation, I'll actually focus on security. So essentially, we could actually describe the E5 value proposition around security by looking at the core themes that E5 actually makes available to customers. Right. So the core themes are machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation. Right. So what I'll actually do is I'll just very quickly go through each of these different themes and what it actually, how these themes actually translate to your concrete security capabilities in the E5 suite. Fantastic. So when we actually talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, the first two themes, what we're actually finding is that the attack surface and the sophistication of attacks has actually become so sophisticated that it's almost impossible for human beings on their own to actually protect against such advanced cyber threats. Right? So sometimes you might actually have cyber threats perpetrated by organizations that are actually sponsored by countries. Right? So the sophistication of these attacks is absolutely phenomenal. To deal with that degree of sophistication, we actually needed to rethink how we protect our customers in the most sophisticated manner. So our solution to that is basically an aggregation of all the security intelligence across the globe, which we internally call as intelligent security graph. So you'll actually hear lots and lots of references to the intelligent security graph. So all the intelligence around, the intelligence flowing in from our digital crimes unit at Microsoft, from law enforcement agencies around the world, from lots and lots of partners, that all of that intelligence flows into the intelligent security graph. And then as a part of E5, we actually make certain capabilities available that basically leverage, using machine learning and artificial intelligence, this intelligence that's actually present in the intelligent security graph. So let's talk about a couple of discrete examples. The first discrete example is risk-based conditional access. So with risk-based conditional access, what basically happens is that we'll actually use heuristics such as, is it really possible for a person to log in from two different locations given the distance between those two different locations in the time that we actually saw a sign-in event occurring. So for example, let's take the example of Lee. Lee logs in from Melbourne in Australia, and then 15 minutes later Lee logs in from Beijing in China. That's an impossible travel scenario. So leveraging machine learning, leveraging artificial intelligence, our systems will actually say that's an impossible travel scenario. So the risk score associated to Lee's that specific sign-in event is elevated, and based on that elevated risk score, you can actually apply certain controls to the login. For example, multi-factor authentication, or you can actually block access to sensitive apps and sensitive information, or you can actually limit access to applications and so on and so forth.
Kenny, if I can ask a question around
Please.
the risk-based conditional access. You mentioned the example of Lee logging in here in Australia in Beijing, a 15-minute gap. With VPNs or private networks and things like that, how does the conditional access cater for that? Is it the multi-factor authentication, or what does it do around that? Because that is a possible scenario. It's something that's been on my mind, is how do you actually handle that?
And that's a great question, Tom. So there are scenarios where those impossible travel scenarios or instances might actually be totally legitimate. And in those kind of scenarios, what we basically do is depending on the policy that's actually defined in the customer's tenant. So for example, an organization might decide that when the risk score for a specific user on a specific sign-in is medium, the user will actually be prompted for multi-factor authentication, right? So let's play this scenario for a second.
Yep.
Let's assume for 1 second that Lee logged on to this system that's a super sensitive system in the customer's specific context and environment from Melbourne, and then 15 minutes later from Beijing. When Lee actually logged on to the system in Beijing, that was actually a VPN, right?
Yep.
That Lee actually did, but obviously to the system it actually appeared as a login attempt from Beijing itself. In that scenario, we'll actually the conditional access policy will prompt Lee for multi-factor authentication, and then when Lee successfully multi-factor authenticates to the application, we'll actually take that signal and put that signal back into the intelligent security graph, basically saying that that specific event was a false positive. And then when Lee attempts to do that in the future, that signal will actually be taken into consideration.
Gotcha.
So that's the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? So it'd be almost impossible for a human being to do that in a completely manual manner, but our systems can actually do that in a completely automated manner using machine learning.
Okay.
So it's fair to say that is a true and real risk, right? My credentials could be stolen, I could have, sold.
Yes.
But I can have, those credentials can be used legitimately or illegitimately by a third party, and if it's left to manual intervention to detect that event. And it's fair to say that in an E3 or an E5 environment, we're looking at E5 to be able to use the risk-based conditional access.
We absolutely are, yes. Yeah. So the machine learning-based, risk-based conditional access, that's a part of E5. And just on the leaked credentials, actually, what we also make available to you as a part of the E5 value proposition is if we spot that your credentials are actually leaked on the internet through the power of the intelligent security graph, we'll actually inform your organization that we see these credentials surfaced somewhere on the internet, whether it be on the dark web or the core internet itself.
That's a key differentiator.
So I think roughly 81% of all the attacks that have actually been perpetrated in the last 12 months have been one way or the other linked to compromised identities. So you can imagine the power of this model or power of this capability that if you could actually proactively get notifications about your leaked credentials on the internet, that could go a long way in helping you detect a threat and respond to a threat in a timely manner. So that's the first sort of concrete example of what E5 can actually give you. In terms of automation, we actually have a very robust information protection engine, as I was alluding to before, that basically gives you very rich sensitive information detection capabilities, classification capabilities, protection capabilities, and monitoring capabilities. So as a part of E5, we actually give you the ability to automatically, in an automated manner, automatically classify information. With E3, you can absolutely manually classify information, which basically means that a user actually has to manually go into the ribbon in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, or for that matter for PDF files as well, and manually classify, decide what the classification is for content, and then apply that classification or apply that tag. With automated classification, we'll actually do regular expression searches through the document, and based on the information that we actually spot in the document, we'll actually classify the document for you. And obviously that's based on your own organizational policies.
And is that fair to say that with the auto classification component, the intelligence is there to prevent me sidestepping classification? Therefore, if I want to send something critical to Tom, I can set a classification much lower that I know will make the document get to Tom, right? Because I've manually set that. Are we saying, or is it fair to say that with auto classification in E5, that would be mitigated against?
It absolutely will be. It absolutely will be. So the way it'll actually work in that specific context is that the admin can go in and basically force a policy that will actually prompt the user to provide a business justification if they were to lower the automated tag that's been applied to the document based on the regular expression searches through the document. So even if you actually lower the tag, to lower the sensitivity level by lowering the tag. Like for example, instead of classifying the information as sensitive, you classify that as personal, right? And you get that information through to Tom. You can both block that information, or you can actually let that information through, but record an auditing event that basically has your business justification link that you provided for changing that tag. Because there might actually be legitimate situations where you actually have to lower the sensitivity of a document. There might actually be specific business scenarios. So in that case, you can actually enforce a policy that basically allows the information to be shared readily, but the user actually still has to provide business justification. And then you obviously have the ability to completely block the information.
Fantastic.
So yeah, so that's one of the examples of how you can actually apply this automated classification. And I just wanted to very quickly mention that this automated classification of information, the information could actually reside on premises. It could reside on a mobile device, it could actually reside in the cloud somewhere. So for example, it could reside in OneDrive Business or SharePoint Online, or for that matter, it could actually reside in a third-party supported SaaS applications.
And how many third-party SaaS applications are there that support information protection?
So we actually have the big names beginning to appear on that list. So Box is supported.
Gotcha.
Dropbox is supported, and you'll actually see a plethora of other SaaS applications come on board as well with that automated classification very soon.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So to recap there, then the key differentiator between E3 and E5 is really three components, right? It's machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation.
And I just wanted to mention one more capability or concrete example of how machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation actually comes in to help you harden your security profile, right? So we actually have a very rich set of tools built into Office 365, into Windows. So for Windows, it's Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. For Office 365, it's Office 365 Secure Score. So using these tools, you can actually get a very clear view of what the security baseline in your organization is at that moment in time. So in the sense that what is really the security posture or the security profile of your endpoints or your Office 365 tenancy as such. And then we'll also in these portals recommend actions to you to further harden the security profile. And you're always most welcome to basically say, right, my security baseline is to actually operate at a specific score as manifested in the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection Office 365 Secure Score, and will actually help you proactively to get to that score.
That's fantastic. So when I look at next steps for looking at an individual business that's currently on an E3, that's experiencing some of the pains that we've discussed around device management, people management, process management, information protection, the next steps, as far as I see it in the conversations that I'm having, are all around visibility. Can we identify together what are the top 5 risks in your organisation?
Yes.
And then can we, using the tools you've just discussed, quantify those risks, prove that those risks exist, and come up with a strategic roadmap for the next 3 to 12 months on how we address those risks and reduce risk over time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if we were to actually sort of describe the E5 key value proposition in 3 words, we'd actually say it gives you very high degree of visibility,
Yep.
driven by machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation.
Mhm.
It gives you a very high degree of control, so you can control information at a device level, at for your investments in the cloud, on premises, or at the information level itself. And then finally, it actually gives you proactive guidance based on, once again, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation to actually harden the security baseline of your organization. We give you the tools to basically simulate attacks in your environment, even before the attacks actually happen. So you're actually much better prepared, and your security posture is much more hardened. In the very likely event of an attack being perpetrated against your environment.
Fantastic. And Kenny, where can we find these tools?
So the Office 365 Attack Simulator, that's actually in public preview right now. So you can basically get onto the public preview of the Office 365 Attack Simulator. You can go to demos.microsoft.com, and if you're a partner, you can actually spin up a tenant, an E5 tenant very quickly, and you can actually try Office 365 Attack Simulator for yourself.
Okay.
Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection and Office 365 Secure Score. You can once again access those tools. So Office 365 Secure Score, you can actually spin up through demos.microsoft.com. Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, please just ping us, and we'll be more than happy to actually help you set up a tenant.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's really, really easy to try all these capabilities for yourself. So we sincerely encourage you to actually go try them out for yourself.
If I can ask a question also, Kenny, about you've explained the value proposition of E5. If as partners we have customers out there that are on E3, what's Microsoft's advice on how to encourage those customers to E5? They may not be using E3, as you well know, they may not be using E3 to their full capabilities. How do we have that discussion about going to E5? And I totally understand what the around the value proposition, but customers don't always understand that. So what's your advice for partners out there to get their customers up to E5?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think one of the first very, very key themes or the key learnings that have actually sort of emerged over the last 2-3 years is that attacks are getting so sophisticated that to only rely on manual policy configuration with no machine learning, with no artificial intelligence, with no automation, almost guarantees you to be hacked. In the sense that we really need, when you're actually dealing with very, very sophisticated attackers across different attack vectors, the numerous amount of attack vectors that we actually have, information and endpoints and cloud applications and on-premises applications and so on and so forth. With those many vectors and with the sophistication of the attacks, you actually need a strategy that basically incorporates machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation to actually help you protect your sensitive assets in the organization.
Yeah.
Right?
And you talked about machine learning and artificial intelligence around the security model. Where does Microsoft get that information from?
So we get that information through this entity called the Intelligent Security Graph that I was actually alluding to before.
Yes,
so please visualize a massive, massive data repository that actually gets input or signals from our digital crimes unit that basically manages or watches all the botnet related data, from teams dedicated for analyst teams at Microsoft that basically proactively look at all the threats across the cyber landscape and basically push that information into the Intelligent Security Graph. All the billions and billions of authentications, so there's around, I think there's over 200 billion authentications that we actually handle on a monthly basis. There's over 1 billion Bing web pages we scan. There's over 200 billion emails that we actually look at through our advanced malware and phishing attack detecting capabilities in Office 365. So we take all of that intelligence, plus all our industry partnerships, plus all the dedicated teams at Microsoft. We take all of that information, we put that in the intelligent security graph, and then your endpoints, your Office 365 tenancies, your third-party SaaS applications are actually protected based on that intelligence that we actually harvest using machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation from the intelligent security graph.
Wow.
So the scale at which the cyber intelligence is available to you is almost unprecedented in the industry.
Wow. Yeah, that's absolutely huge. And on the ATP, for example, you mentioned emails. I hear that there is, essentially when a bit of malware comes in, it gets detonated in its own sort of virtual environment before it actually gets to me. Is that sort of what happens, or?
No, that's absolutely. So that's a great sort of place to bring in the example of Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection. Right?
Yep.
The way Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection actually works is it'll take an email that's coming into your tenancy, Office 365
Yep.
tenancy. It'll actually spin up a virtual machine in the background, which is completely transparent to the user. It'll actually take the attachment in the email into this thing called the detonation chamber, and it'll actually run that attachment to see if there are any runtime manifestations of malware in the file. Because sometimes if you actually look at a file at rest without running it, you might not detect a very, very sophisticated piece of malware.
Yep.
Without machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation, that would be absolutely impossible to do. And Office 365 ATP is a part of E5. So
Wow.
really the value proposition of E5 is built-in security that leverages machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation from this massive repository called the Intelligent Security Graph, and is self-refining because of all the additional signals that we get every single second or every single millisecond from thousands and thousands of Office 365 tenancies, Windows devices, and signals from third-party SaaS applications through cloud app security across the globe.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic.
So taking Tom's question a little bit further, E3 to E5, let's assume, as in many conversations we have, right, Tom's unfortunate enough that he's in a situation where he's had a breach that falls under the new mandatory breach disclosure laws. If Tom is on an E3 right now, how does Microsoft help Tom recover from that breach situation? And going beyond that, had Tom been on an E5, what could have been done or what would be done to increase the time to recover from such a breach, both for Tom's business and for Tom personally as an executive in the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right? So let's start with Microsoft 365 E3, right?
Yeah.
So we'd actually protect the customer across the actual protection against data breaches. Protect against protection. So we'd actually protect against data breaches. If a data breach was to happen, we'd actually be able to detect that in a very timely manner through the tools that we actually have available to customers. And then once the data breach is detected, we'd actually enable the customer, empower the customer to actually respond to that data breach in a very timely manner. And that basically is a combination of the people, process, and technology elements. So our tools basically take into consideration the people and process aspect of technology as well, right? So we actually have very rich incident management capabilities built into the tooling as well to incorporate the people and the process dimension of things. Yeah. So let's take a discrete example. Let's start at protect first. So how would we actually protect against a data breach? So let's assume that the information is stored in Office 365 for a second. Yeah? We actually have very advanced data loss prevention capabilities built into Office 365 E3 that will actually allow you to protect information stored in SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Teams, Exchange Online. So the plethora of Office 365 services that we make available to you. Let's take an example of that. What you can basically do is you can put a data loss prevention policy in place that actually says if the information is sensitive, do not allow it to be shared outside the organization. Right? So at the protect layer, we actually have the controls available, both from a data loss prevention perspective and from a governance perspective. Right? So you can actually have the correct retention and disposition of content, if you so wish, in Office 365. Right? So we actually have very rich tooling and capabilities available for you to do that. So data loss prevention, data governance, all baked into Office 365. Right? Then we actually have dedicated tools like, for example, Compliance Manager and Office 365 Secure Score, right? So Office 365 Secure Score will actually give you a very clear visibility of what the security profile of your Office 365 tenancy is, right? And Compliance Manager will actually give you very specific information on what you need to do in your Office 365 tenancy to actually harden it, to protect it against data breaches. May that be the application of data loss prevention policies or data governance policies or what have you, right? So from a protection perspective, it's a combination of tooling that actually allows you to look at your security profile, look at your compliance profile, and make the required adjustments based on very rich guidance that will actually protect you against a data breach, and the controls that we actually have built into Office 365 to actually protect you against these data breaches, right? At a detect layer, we actually have very advanced detections built into Office 365. So advanced security management, Office 365 auditing, the management activity API that we actually have surfaced through Office 365 will actually allow you to take this auditing information and ingest that to a SIEM solution, right? So once again, from a detection perspective, we actually not only give you detection capabilities or very deep auditing capabilities and alerting capabilities in Office 365 itself, we also make that information available to you so you can actually ingest that information in the SIEM solution and apply your own rules to detect data breaches if you so wish. Yeah. And then from a response perspective, we actually have very rich incident management capabilities built into, for example, the Compliance Manager. You'll also find very rich incident management capabilities built into the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, which will actually help you respond to a data breach incident in a very timely manner and as quickly as possible and as painlessly as possible.
So is it fair to say in the scenario with Tom's breach that so Compliance Manager is fed and understands all of the articles for GDPR, right? So if Tom's breach was related to GDPR compliant type information,
yes,
the Compliance Manager component understands and lets Tom know which articles that he needed to or should have or will need to adhere to moving forwards.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
And
So
Compliance Manager is part of the E5 capability.
That's exactly right. And the Compliance Manager actually has compliance tests against specific standards, right? So you can actually do a compliance test against GDPR, but then you can also do a compliance test against HIPAA, right? So if you're actually an organization in the health sector. So we have specific standards. So what you can basically say is, you can basically say for standard X, for example, GDPR, please tell me what my compliance posture looks like across Office 365, right? So if there was to be a breach, how protected am I, essentially? So for example, let's assume for 1 second, right? Let's assume for 1 second that Tom actually had a partner like Insentra who had come in and who basically configured the Office 365 tenancy from a protection standpoint. So you're putting the correct data loss prevention policies in place or data governance policies in place, had actually had a look at the compliance posture of the Office 365 tenancy using something like Compliance Manager, a tool like Compliance Manager, and looked at the security profile of the Office 365 tenancy through Office 365 Secure Score. In that situation, you would actually have a very, very strong fence around Office 365 to prevent against those data breaches. In the unlikely event that you actually had a data breach, once again, a partner like Insentra could actually provide very, very quick detection capabilities by configuring components such as Office 365 auditing, advanced security management, and all the information that we actually have available for ingestion into SIEM solutions in the correct manner. And then across response, configuring the incident management capabilities in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center and Compliance Manager to actually help customers respond to those data breaches in a timely manner. So across these three pillars, protection, detection, and response, a partner working with the tools and the intelligence that we actually have built into Office 365 can actually protect, detect, and respond, or empower the customer to protect, detect, and respond if there was to be a data breach.
That's fantastic. So a key takeaway from me from that then is that leveraging the capabilities and the tools that are available in E5, like Compliance Manager and Office 365 Secure Score, we can provide the forward-looking visibility into the way organisations are dealing with information, compliant type information, PCI DSS or HIPAA, medical information. We can use the capability that's there in E5 that goes above and beyond what's there in E3 to provide that visibility and give Tom the capability to take action and prepare properly to prevent such a breach.
Absolutely, and that's all pivoted on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and automation. So when you actually use the capabilities that we actually offer you as a part of Microsoft 365 E5 or Office 365 E5, you leverage the machine learning and the automation and the artificial intelligence to ensure that you're actually protected against data breaches, you detect data breaches as they actually happen as quickly as possible, and you respond to them in a timely manner.
Given what we've discussed, what are our next steps for an organisation?
Absolutely. So look, we actually have a very, very easy way for customers to try these capabilities for themselves. You can actually spin yourself up a trial tenant, or even better, and a recommended approach is that you actually engage one of our security and compliance partners in our very rich ecosystem of partners here in Australia, and they can actually come and do a security POC for you, and that POC, a proof of concept, can actually give you a very good glimpse and appreciation of what is possible and how those possibilities actually translate to your specific business and customer context.
So yeah, thanks for partnering with us, Kenny. We, as you know, we've put together the security assessment POC deliverable, which is ostensibly a 4-day POC that's tailored for each of the customers based on the risks that we've talked about in this conversation. Right. So there are 4 days, the technology-focused days. There's an information protection day, an identity management day, a threat protection day, and then there's a roadmap and strategy day, right? So across those 4 days, we can prioritise the deliverables for that POC assessment to match and quantify the identified risks by an organisation. So it's not just a POC at canned where we're just going to showcase all the technology. We will align the deliverables in that POC assessment to the identified risks, right? And that's a canned, packaged POC partner with Microsoft Insentra deliverable.
Absolutely, and having had a look at that, at the definition of the POC, we feel that actually provide a very good sort of cross the 4 pillars of security view of how the security capabilities embedded in Microsoft 365 can actually add real value in protecting, detecting and responding to threats as they actually happen in very complex customer environments. So, absolutely.
We're looking forward to have some great success with those POCs.
Cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thanks for the opportunity to partner with you.
Thanks, Kenny. Great to see you. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.